welcome to Noise Levels. This is the Noise Levels podcast, episode 7. And today's focus is Obzine.
Obzine.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
What's Obzine, Bundy?
Well, it was like a free zine that was, they were in local music shops and record stores all around Penrith and the Blue Mountains area.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it was probably one of my favourite zines of all time, I'd have to say.
Yeah, so it's a weird sort of thing because it's not, like, it's a zine, obviously, and then the name is Obzine, but it sort of occupies this space a bit more akin to street press. So in the 90s and the 80s before it, and a little bit of the noughties, like the 2000s, there was this thing called street press, and I was explaining this to some students of mine the other day. It's a dead media. It's not something that's around anymore. Street press was a free publication that was propped up by a lot of advertising. And it came out a lot, like usually like once a week. And you just go to any sort of music store or record store or like, you know, a fashion sort of place, and you can pick up a free copy of like the Drum Media or Revolver or before that on the street. And it was just a way, it was like what we had instead of the internet before the internet.
That's a really good way. That's exactly what I was putting. It was basically analog Facebook or MySpace or something like that.
Even down to people writing letters in to complain and have fights that were drawn out over multiple issues. It was just a lot slower than the internet, that's all, which is probably saving grace. So we've got an interview with Mark Alston, who is the man behind Obzine. He started this publication in 1999, and it's mainly just an interview with him. I've got a couple of interviews with some contributors, and we've got some music that's sort of associated with it. We're going to try and go through it in as linear a fashion as possible from the start to the end, and we'll just see how we go. I was just saying to Bundy before we started, I don't really have much of a script for this one, because it is a bit different, because it's not a band that we're focused on. We're focused on just an interview with one person and this whole scene that grew out of Obzine.
Yeah.
Well,
it pretty much was the glue that like pulled everything together, really. Like if you weren't reading Obzine, you wouldn't have had a clue that what gigs were coming up or anything like that. Yeah. So
all right, so let's hear from Mark and how he was inspired to start this thing.
Yeah, well, it's a long way to go back and think about, but I reckon it started because I grew up in Blacksland and there was heaps of cool stuff happening in the mountains, and probably being in my brother's band and playing all these cool underage gigs, and then growing up a little bit and then going, oh, like there's all this stuff going on. I love writing, you know, what do I do with it all? And it's like, oh, well, let's try a zine, because I think the Jasper gigs used to have their own mini zines when they did a thing, and I think maybe that's what inspired me to kind of go, oh cool, you can put music into a zine and people read about it and find out a bit more about the bands. And so I think it was when the Blacksland Tavern started doing gigs, I was like, I'm just going to go and take a photo and interview Futile and make up my own zine, and kind of just kicked off from there. You know, we were that far out, like you'd get hardly any coverage, and there was a lot going on at Blacksland and Katoomba, and even, you know, the Alex in Lura, and then all these underage like youth centre events at like Warramoo Hall and, you know, down at Merrowes Hall and whatever, and you sort of go like, Drum Media didn't care about that sort of stuff. And the other one was being in so many bands. Like I was like the guy in the band always going, let's put out a tape or a CD and then try and get a review in Drum Media or in Revolver or whatever it was. And it's like, it was hard because there's a lot of big name bands doing big shows and all the things. And so as this, you know, being in bands from way out in Western Sydney going, who's going to cover our stuff? Like who's going to review our CD? And we got lucky sometimes, but that was part of it too. It's like, well, if we start up our own media, we can just review our own stuff, you know. It's sort of like some little punk band records something in Penrith, we can review it next issue, and then suddenly, I don't know, a couple of hundred people have read about it, whereas where else would they have got any media coverage? And I reckon that's what sort of creates a scene that, you know, people read it and go, oh, I've heard of that, and then they see them on a show, like on a poster and go, I might actually go and watch that band because I read about them in the thing. Like, I think it worked. Like, people weren't as instantly connected. So it was kind of like you'd go to the record store to see what's going on and pick up the drum media to see what gigs were on. Like, it was sort of the only way to connect was these slow printed ways, I guess. Like, people had time, I think, before the scrolling era to sit there and read stuff. Like,
Yeah.
like, I don't think I pick up anything and read it anymore myself because, like, you're just so busy on the screen, or you just Google it and you jump on the computer, and it's like, I think, yeah, it was sort of a slower time, and so it also worked because of that. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear how Mark was saying that he doesn't get time to read, or doesn't read as much as what he did back in those days. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating to hear. And
Yeah, well, I haven't read much in the last 2 years, but that's because I got a 4-year-old.
yeah, well, I never really was much of a big reader because I'm just lazy, but I always had a flick through this because I went and seen all these bands,
Yeah.
and you wanted to see what someone thought of them and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and look, we're talking about 1999 here, and Mark was talking about the Jasper gigs, which were these shows in the Blaxland region, these all ages shows with like great lineups of bands from the area at that time, like bands like the Hassle Brigade in their first sort of incarnation, and bands like Futile, and Futile were on the cover of the very first Obzine, and they were like a metal band from the area. So it was interesting hearing Mark talk about getting inspiration from this, with the realization that you could do a zine. Like, and I think everyone who's ever done a zine has this moment where like they see a zine and go, oh, hang on, I could do that.
yeah,
I can go down to Centrelink and photocopy a bunch of shit down there and pretend it's my resume, but really it's a zine that I'm going to go and like distribute to shows.
the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. And yeah, like Penrith didn't have a huge zine culture, and so Obzine was a bit more than a typical zine because it did turn into such a community. And so we'll hear a bit from Mark again, and he talks about the technology he used to create this zine, like, and then Adam O'Sullivan from the Hass Brigade, who like has figured a lot in the Noise Levels project. All the way from the very first podcast we did, to like the recent Hass Brigade reunion show that we did on the anniversary of his passing, or the anniversary of his birthday. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was, but it was a significant date, 10 years old from when Adam passed, and he was instrumental in the creation of Obzine.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you realise that, but like the first couple of issues from like issue 2 to issue 4, he had a hand in sort of co-designing it, and on your screen you'll see some examples of this. But anyway, here's Mark talking about it.
I think I just had probably an old PC and Microsoft Publisher or something dumb like that, and just went, oh, okay, I'll just put these things together. And my dad had just got back from America with like one of the very first digital cameras, which was like a 1 megapixel HP digital camera thing, and so I think that's what I took the photos of Futile on. And so it's kind of like, oh, suddenly you can take a photo and put it straight onto the computer. You don't have to go down to the Photoshop, get it printed out, then scan it in and all that. And I think like we were at that time where things were a bit digital, was just appearing, and it was, it makes it easy to put out this sort of stuff. Yeah, that was really amazing because obviously I'd been talking to him. I'd probably said to him, oh, my computer's slow and I don't have time to edit the stuff and lay it out, and I'm using this program, not that program. And, he was such a good dude. Like, I remember him saying, like, just come around to my place and we'll have a look. Yeah, and he showed me, because he was living in the garage underneath, and he showed me his little place where he's, hang out and, he's, and he'd print out the proof copy. Yeah, I just remember being there that time, and I think going forward, like, maybe it was emailing copy between him and whatever. Like, yeah, he was super helpful and super, like, yeah, just giving with his time. And I'm like, wow, this is good. And I guess like he had the vested interest in that, sort of trying to start his own label, and he had CDs to review. And like you'll see through the issues following, like, there's some music that he was trying to get across the line, as well as the Hassle Brigade stuff. And there's some pretty funny reviews in there. There's one from Lucinda talking about the Hassle Brigade playing at the Alex. She's saying, oh, we're trying to keep it good with the public, and so we're trying not to swear too much, but they've got Hassle Brigade on stage.
Yeah, so in the second half of 1999, Obzine starts coming out. So the first issue was in June 1999, and then Mark pumps out an issue basically every 1 or 2 months until he gets to about issue 6 in December of 1999, and and Adam has already come and gone by this point. So Adam was only really involved for the first, like as I said, about 3 issues or so. But then by issue 6, the zine is being stocked in 11 different locations, and it just sort of keeps growing across the next year and a half. And there's like these things happening in the Blue Mountains which sort of start growing around the same time, like the Zound gigs. Craig McVie was putting shows on and he was writing a column in the local paper called Right Here, Right Now in the Penrith Press or the Star. I think he actually wrote for both of them and jumped from one to the other. And then he started doing the column in Obzine as well, quite early on in like issue 5. So what happens with issue 6 is a person known as Mark Greenhill, who was a councillor at the time, he's now the mayor of the Blue Mountains.
Oh, okay.
He donated money to Obzine, and there's an article about Obzine that appeared in the Blue Mountains Gazette at that time, and Mark organises for a guy called Brendan Lott to help with the printing, and it sort of becomes a bit more sort of professional looking. I'm not going to say it's more professional inside because it still has a lot of zine attitude in it.
Yeah.
But it's more professional looking, and it's just a really decent print job, especially for that time. So here's Mark talking about that.
Somehow I got connected up with the Mount Riverview Youth Centre, and so that we were dropping some zines there, and there was a lady there called Trish. So she introduced me, I think, to Brendan, possibly, and then I'm pretty sure then those guys got Mark Greenhill involved, and so it was sort of like this, I guess, through the youth centre, like they had access to council in some way, and so it was sort of like the first funded issue was like Mark Greenhill giving me, I don't know, it was $400 or something, and the cover of the Gazette, and it was like a pretty amazing, and you sort of go, oh wow, I'm doing something that someone in the real world thinks is valuable, not just it's a bunch of punk kids. It's like these councillors suddenly have a vested interest, and I couldn't quite see why at the time, but like I guess Mark Greenhill especially, like he's an old punk rocker with the arm tats and that sort of thing, and it's like, oh okay, he obviously saw an opportunity for himself to get on the cover of the Gazette, but also, he saw someone doing something that he was also passionate about, which is the music. So, yeah, it's a funny little thing that happened there, because also I got to put on the Skankeith gig, and that was like the council paid me to organise a bunch of bands and paid for the hall and all that, and I'm like, I can't remember how I got so deep into like the council being behind such a a ratty little photocopied zine. It's crazy. Yeah, I probably had not much else to do. I was probably at uni studying, going, this is more fun. Because the first few issues were pretty small. Put it in like, I don't know, 5 or 6 shops. Like when it was started, I guess even the distribution part was easy because it probably took, a couple of hours getting them down to Penrith or wherever they went. But then, yeah, as things grow, you sort of go, oh, suddenly I've got more pages, which means more content, which means more design time and more editing. And I remember reading in one of them, maybe it was the 3rd issue, and it says like, oh, sorry for all the spelling mistakes last issue, but we corrected them and reprinted. So obviously I was rushing stuff out. I guess it slowly built. So like each month or each edition, it's kind of like, oh, where else can we go? Because like I always have this thing of when I'm doing something, like I just want the next one to be a bit bigger or better or further or whatever. And so, I was obviously just on the lookout for stuff. Or people would say, oh, I live in Bathurst, like, can I get a copy of it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll drive all the way to Bathurst and drop 20 copies at Stop and Rock or whatever it was called. Yeah, I just sort of went, because we'd done that gig at Oberon, I was like, oh, I know now where I can drop some zines there. So every month I'll just do a trip. I think I had an old Corolla or Corona at the time, and I'd just get in it and go driving around dropping zines, and that's the fun bit. And that's what I found later when I did Haze Mag. Like I realized I quite enjoy that part of it. Like I love just getting in the car and driving and having I jump out, like, okay, how many copies will I put at this place? Your mind's doing the calculation. Like last time I left 20, there's sort of 3 left, so maybe I'll just do 15 this time or whatever. Like you got a bit of that going on in your brain, and then you get to chat to the shopkeeper and find out like what their business is up to or what the music scene in that area is up to. I guess I had some helping hands where I'd go, hey, can you take these here, there, or everywhere? Like I remember Dad took something to the Red Eye and whatnot for me sometimes because he was in the city anyway. Yeah, and there were a lot of helping hands, so that made it easier. But yeah, I used to love that. Would just do a drive. I'd go, okay, I'm going to go out to Bathurst and back and just do Katoomba and up. And then, the next day I might do Katoomba down to Blacksland, and then the next day I'll do Penrith, and then, I think it was St. Clair or St. Mary's, or, there's some towns which just had little record stores that you'd find, and you go, oh, well, they'll take a zine. Yeah, and then each time you found a new location, new people would read it and go, oh, shoot, where's this thing come from? What's going on here? And, get excited. So I think that's how it kept building.
So we mentioned before Craig McVie, and Craig was in a few different bands back then in the Penrith area and beyond. So Craig is a sort of a keystone figure in Sydney music, because he is part of all these bands in Western Sydney, but he also played in the Shirkers, which then means there's a bit of cross-pollination between Castle Hill and the city.
Yeah.
Because the Shirkers was a punk band that also had Adam Lees, who went on to be in Staying at Home, Luke Shirker, who went on to play in a whole range of bands like Stereo City and the Coletons, and his brother Paul Shirker, who also played in bands like the Panic Attacks and Brand Disloyalty, and they also had Jono in there, who was from Tub. I can't pronounce this band name. It's one of the most ridiculously spelled band names. It's T-U. It's like capital T, capital U, capital B, little b, capital H. It's Tubber. But anyway, and Jono's been in a bunch of bands. He was in Hell City Glamours as well and some other bands. But that's a whole other scene. Craig McVie played bass in that band and also played bass in the band Scratch Habit back in Penrith, and then fronted his own band Klobassi.
Yep.
And then Fat Slinky after that.
Yep.
And he was just such a bit of a wheeler and dealer, and putting on shows, and was a very sort of charismatic figure at that time. And so here's Mark talking about Craig sort of coming into the Obzine sort of wheelhouse.
Yeah, so the Penrith Star had his column Right Here, Right Now, and I saw it and I went, hey, that's cool. And so connected up with him, and he was great. Not only did he submit heaps of cool stuff, he had such a vibe at the time. He was one of those go-get-'em guys. And so he walked me around Penrith Plaza, and we went to places like General Pants Co. And he's going hey, guys, you should advertise in this magazine. Look at it. It's the coolest thing. All these people read it. And so, yeah, he was a big advocate at the time. So it's good. And it just swayed both ways. It's you'd be able to talk about his music in the zine. He'd talk about his own stuff as well as everyone else's stuff. And then, he had his other column. Yeah, I guess for us it was being in bands in high school, it seemed really cool because we'd play I don't know, at a hall in Blacksland, and you'd have 200 people there or something ridiculous because you're in high school still. You got this really big community of people that are into it. And then it probably dropped off. For me, I had that feeling of oh, maybe there's nothing going on anymore, and maybe bands aren't still playing or whatever. Because I noticed I mentioned that a few times in there. It's funny to read back and not really have a full memory of why am I writing that? Why was I so worried about the scene dying or something like that? But obviously I was oh no, if I do this, it'll keep going, and I'll be able to go to shows. And because my vested interest, of course, was just I get to go and watch lots of music, and I've got an excuse to do it. I reckon the zine and the site and all that helped connect a bit of I don't think people would have come up the mountain so much from Penrith if there was no zine sort of thing. And so I think that helped push it a bit, and vice versa. I don't think people from the mountains go down to Penrith much, but it's when it feels a bit more connected, I think it did help sort of for everything to be a little bit up. But obviously Cameron and the gang there at Celts, they were putting on some pretty cool stuff, and that's because he had a passion to do it. And I think that's a big part of it, as opposed to now where everything's got to make sense economically. I think back in the earlier 2000s, it was kind of people were still doing stuff because it was cool. I think we kind of lost a little bit of that. And like all those sound gigs, like that was funding probably from council to youth centres, and then they were putting on these gigs which would put 5 or 6 bands on, which is awesome. Like, and that's the other thing, there were so many, there'd be like 6 bands, 8 bands, or Prank Fest with 2 stages. Like, it's just crazy to think about that now, like, because I don't know, I think it's hard to get people to shows anymore.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear Mark talking about like connecting the scene. So myself coming from Penrith, and I didn't really grow up in a music sort of environment. Didn't really happen until Luke sort of. Well, I liked music, but I wasn't into I didn't know anything about the local scene until Luke started going to stuff, and then
and I didn't even play. I wasn't really interested in music. I picked up the drums as a way to sort of hang out with my mates because
I remember harassing you to buy a drum kit for about a month.
Yeah, so but and like Mark mentioned earlier, the Skankeith gig that he put on in I think 2000, and I was just saying to Bundy before, we actually went to that show up in Blackheath, pretty remote sort of area. It's like more than an hour from Penrith West on the train, and of course we were like 19 at the time, and so we went to this show in a hall, Bates Hall I think it was called. And there was 4 or 5 bands, and I said to Bundy, the reason you don't remember it is because we only watched 2 of the bands, and because we were 19, we spent most of the time in the pub. I think the Gardeners Inn, because they had really good meat pies, and that was our reason for being there. But yeah, like, it was such a vibe, and like this is one of the things that sort of motivates me is the Blue Mountains in Penrith scenes aren't really spoken about beyond Blue Mountains in Penrith. And like even like the recent publication of this phenomenal text Australia, which is like a 2-volume book that details the history of punk from the 70s to the 90s.
Does it even go past Strathfield?
Well, it goes all over Australia, and it mentions like regional scenes like Hornsby and Wollongong and Newcastle, but it doesn't touch Penrith. And I don't think the writer Tristan Clark would have even been aware that there were punk bands in Penrith back then. But of course, Obzine isn't just punk, it was about all the alternative music in that area, like metal. So we're going to play a track now from, and I asked Mark to pick 3 songs that he thinks we should play as indicative of the scene. And the first one is a song by Futile. Futile were a heavy metal band from Blaxland, and they were like this band where the members went on to play in like all these other heavy metal bands in the area, like Day of the Dead, Sickened, Bread from Hate, and it's just they were just like the it sort of metal band from the late 90s or mid to late 90s in the lower Blue Mountains. So here's their song Liar.
Well, I guess you could say why you came for I know you will.
was such an impactful sort of scene that was growing around that time, and I've got some quotes from people who were involved. So I put a call out to various people who contributed to Obzine and had a few people come back to me. This is Daniel Herborn, who contributed to quite a few Obzines, and he sent me a quote that I could use in the podcast. And he said, well, Obzine was really important back then. The internet was around, but was way less prominent. You relied much more on the street press to see what gigs were on. Obzine opened my eyes up to the fact that there was a local music scene and you didn't always have to trek into the city to see bands. There was a culture of bands from all different genres doing DIY gigs around the lower mountains in Penrith. One funny thing I remember is that there was one gig at the basketball court, on the basketball court at the Penrith Police Boys Club, headlined by Loki, and Obzine reported on it. At this gig, I'd won a Beastie Boys CD by shooting a basketball through the hoops, which had been raised up to the roof. The Obzine story mentioned all this, but just said someone won a CD. So, things were happening. And, like, I think there was an explosion of bands as a result of Obzine as much as Obzine feeding off this.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, because people saw it and were like, oh, there's bands playing? I could be in a band, I could play somewhere. Like, yeah. And so all these bands were popping up around Penrith and the Blue Mountains. In all different kinds of genres, really. So we're in early 2000s, and Mark starts getting noticed, and here's a quote from him.
Oh, so I'd been told that you're a nominee for the Youth Media Award. It's a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at it and I went, oh, no, I can't go to that because my brother's playing a gig at the Blue Tongue Cafe in Glenbrook, I think it was. I was like, I've got to go watch my brother play. Why would I go to some awards night? And then, like, they told me a few times, and I'm like, yeah, I know it's on, I can't go. Like, and I think what they couldn't tell me was, like, you're going to win an award, and the guys from Friends of Rom are going to be handing out the awards. But they couldn't tell me that. And, like, if I'd known that, I probably would have turned up to it, and it probably would have helped my, I don't know, career or something, you know? So I've still got that. It's a really cool acrylic award. Like, it's a big block, it looks like a little brick sort of thing, and I've still got that on my desk at work to this day, just because I was like, I did something that was cool and it was awarded by Frenzel, and, you know, it's like, I was kind of proud. I was like, oh, I've done something worthwhile in my life. Like, I mean, I obviously grew up skateboarding. I wanted to start a separate skate zine. I was like, oh no, I'll just put some photos in, because, like, I had a camera and I'm out skateboarding. I'm like, that's cool. Some kid's doing a thing. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we did the same thing where everyone knew these skateboarders that were around skating? But it never really did anything. But there were also, I think, Blackman Bicycles were kind enough to donate some money and advertise. And so I was like, oh, they're like sport. Like, I don't know anything about bikes, but maybe if I put some skateboarding in, like, it'll feel a bit closer to making it worth their while. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I was pandering to an advertiser. There's all this stuff going on, but where do you find it? Like, where's the one place where you know what's going on? You know, where's the scene, I guess you call it? And it's like, oh, well, this is the place to sort of put it all together. And you don't know. You put out the first issue and think, is there going to be enough content even to do something like this? You know, and it turns out that you got years worth of stuff to do. And it's like, it doesn't have to be professional. It's like, if you're interested in music, like, or photography or writing or anything really, like, we put some pretty weird stuff in the zine. It's like, you can just send it to me and I'll just publish it. So I think it was a bit of that. It's like the community jumps in and then it becomes bigger. It's like, if it was just me doing everything, I probably would have given up a lot earlier. Yeah.
Bundy, what do you remember about Y2K?
I remember there was like a massive panic that, wasn't it, everyone's computer was going to blow up on the midnight, January the 1st, 2000 or something like that.
Yeah, because the clocks weren't built to tick over to the new millennium. That planes were going to drop out of the sky. And
it was like cars were going to just stop.
All of civilization was going to come to an end. And this is reflected in, like, Obzine too. Like, so there's a bit of chatter in, like, the issues around the turn of the millennium, between issues like 6 and 7 or whatever, about the Y2K bug coming. And, like, reading back on it, I just saw it and I was just like, well, man, I haven't thought about that for years. What a ridiculous little moment where, like, everyone woke up and just went, yeah, that was nothing.
But Was this really like an early conspiracy theory?
Yeah. Here's Mark talking about it, and just a little bit about the cringe factor. And he mentioned before about they started printing some pretty weird things in Obzine because they threw it open to people to contribute.
Yeah, awesome.
I was just reading it was the first issue in 2000, and so it was this whole thing of like, if you're reading this issue, it means the Y2K bug didn't go off, because that was a big deal, I guess, at the time, and it's pretty funny to read. And I saw it, like, there's a little letter or an interview with you going, "Oh, I'm going to take my writing more seriously," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." Did you do that? And I think you said you'd also going to drink less beer.
Look, I got to be honest with you, because I wrote a lot of stuff for Obzine, and like I go back and read some of it, and like it's pretty cringy, and I'm just like, I can't believe you published that. You just let me write anything.
Well, because I'm reading my own stuff thinking the same thing. I'm like, it was super cringe. But I think in that time period, like, it was real. And people were reading it like, oh, this is just a dude that loves the music. Like, and everyone's reviews were like that. Like, we weren't professional. And I think that was what made it good. Because if you then went to read Drum Media, the guy that reviewed the singles, he'd always have to not really say if it was good or bad. He just had to keep his own cool. And I'm like, oh, no, it was heaps better. Like, we were not necessarily good writers or whatever, but like I don't know, like we had a way of communicating that people connected with, so maybe that's better.
So yeah, as Mark was saying there about always being honest with his reviews and stuff like that. So I remember getting the August edition of 2000 and reading our performance at Woodstock, and I remember it being a pretty disastrous performance, and there was the write-up's pretty. I
don't think the write-up's too bad. We had
being
worse
nice
write-ups.
about it, but he is he's like, oh, it's.
So we're referring to our band, the Shenanigans, and this is the beginning, like when our band was starting to play in front of people more. And some pretty ordinary performances. But then, like, I don't know, the great thing is that...
No, he was 100% right.
Yeah. But, like, in 2001, he later reviews us and says, "Isn't it great when you see a band and they've actually gotten good after a while?" Which is, praise, but it's also acknowledging that we weren't good before.
I actually think he was probably being a little bit nice, to be honest, if you listen to Mark. So.
Yeah. Here's some recordings of more contributors talking about, contributing to Obzine and the fact that Mark would just publish anything. But these guys all wrote great stuff. So here's Phil Williams, who did a lot of photography for Obzine and wrote reviews.
I guess it was the end of the 90s, 96, 97, around then when I met Mark. Probably first met him at the Blue Tongue Cafe. I used to just be pretty sociable, chat with anyone who looked interesting. And Mark had such great energy, which he put so much into the music scene. Worked for a while at the record shop in Emu Plains, and then that closed, and I worked at the Leading Edge. So when Obzine was getting distributed, I was stacking them up in there, handing them out to people. I remember running out of the shop to take a impromptu lunch break, I think, from Leading Edge, because Nigel and Clint had come in, so we went and had a chat, did a bit of a dodgy interview with them. Yeah, I was going to a lot of gigs. I was taking a lot of photos as well, and I was studying art. Often take photos at local gigs. Some of them would end up in Obzine, and started writing reviews. A write-up on whatever gig I'd seen. Some pretty crap journalism when I look back at it. Some of my interview techniques were pretty crap. The most funniest one was probably wandering around the parks of Glenbrook drinking with the boys from Sickened, Matt and Lenny, Nathan and Mick. That was pretty hilarious. Just trying to get something I could write down, and then just trying to get them to pose for some photos. Piss takes of band photos basically is what we were doing. Sometimes I go to a gig and I didn't have a press pass or anything, so I couldn't take my camera into some, and I'd just sit and draw, try and capture the band in motion. Good times, going to see Glister and Snare and Milton, Earth to Nigel, Clabassi, Little More Than You, Hassle Brigade. So many bands. Gigs at Warramoo Hall, gigs at Blackson Hall, lots of gigs that Mark put on. Mark did such an amazing job. I decided I could try and put on gigs too. I put on a few at the Gearans with Danny. around the place. Put on a little day out at Penrith Regional Gallery down at Lewis. That was fun. It was a lot of work. Convinced the gallery to pay the artists to come and perform and set up the day. It was bit off more than I could chew probably a few times, but that's all part of being in your 20s, isn't it? The punk ethic, DIY, just get stuff happening. Thanks heaps, Mark, for all your energy, all your efforts, all your amazing work on the music scene in the mountains. Love your work. Cheers, man.
I contributed to Obzine many years ago. It was mostly album and gig reviews, but a couple of drawings I did were also published. I still have some copies of those issues laying around somewhere. I'd published a comic book zine a few years prior which included some reviews. I enjoyed writing them but didn't think my writing was professional enough or good enough to try and contribute to the better-known street press publications of the time. I have fond memories of my time writing for Obzine, even though I never actually met any of the other contributors in person. But writing for Obzine and having my words and illustrations published helped me to build confidence and eventually led to my finding paid work writing for another publication called Neutralizer. I grew up in Penrith, so for me Obzine was the first time that I had seen a publication that focused on the local music scene, and I wanted to be a part of it. I was barely into my 20s at the time and the internet was still kind of in its infancy, for me at least. I didn't even own a computer until the age of 21. It's nice that zines like this are still remembered by people, especially considering how sporadic the local music scene in Penrith could be back then, with Celts Bar being pretty much the only consistent venue until it wasn't. Panthers would start hosting live bands only to stop after a few shows, and it pretty much stayed that way until recently with Elton Chong's, but there is still room for improvement. Having reread through some of the old issues, Obzine serves as a great record of a time gone by, and I really enjoyed refreshing my memory of that era.
I remember how encouraging it was to have work published in Obzine in the early 2000s there. I was probably in my first year of uni and having reviews for Moom and Mogwai and various strange illustrations be accepted and appearing in the pages of the magazine. It was just such a fundamental part of the music scene in the mountains in Western Sydney of the time. As a reader, I looked out for every issue that I could, and kudos to Mark and to all the other contributors who made it happen through the years. I'm grateful to have played a small part in it.
So that was initially Phil Williams, who I said wrote reviews and did photography for Obzine, and then we had Jolon Larter after that, who is a fantastic illustrator, and I didn't realise until I started speaking to him for this podcast that he'd done zines before Obzine. So it's really hard to find zines from Penrith from earlier than Obzine. So if anyone did one, hit me up, let me know.
Yeah.
And then after that, we had Peter Newman, who also contributed to Obzine, I think as an illustrator. But yeah, it was just great to see so many people and hearing people speak so fondly of Obzine. We also had other people who contributed columns. So we get to around issue 15, which is the middle of 2000s basically. And we've got regular columns from different people from around the place. So Lucinda is someone who's putting on shows up around Lura at the Alex, and she had a radio show that she did in Katoomba, which focused on punk and ska music, and she was putting on all these punk gigs up there. And so she wrote a column for Obzine as well around this time. And we also had Bomber, Brad Moore, who ran the Bombshell website and put on heaps of tours and shows with bands for at least 20 years. And Bombshell was huge, and he contributed a column to Obzine too when Bombshell was just in its infancy before he sort of focused more just on that. And here's a quote from Brad Bomber about Obzine, and he said to me, "It was always a good outlet for giving bands that first shot at coverage. Before internet really took off, there was always that city-west divide. So Obzine was a solid outlet that those out west and mountains could be seen. They were always encouraging bands to get online. If I remember right, they had a portal for bands to get a page up online when many bands didn't have or even know how to make a website. And Obzine was supportive of pushing them. It was always an entertaining read, as it was mostly contributors who were in bands, reviewing other bands and shows and releases, etc. So that was Bomber talking about that. We're going to hear now another song. I think it's time for another song. This is the second song that Mark picked, and it is Earth to Nigel. If you wanna, Earth to Nigel was a sort of a noise pop band, is how they sometimes describe themselves. Just a catchy sort of fun band, like an amazing band, and I say that from the perspective of someone who loved them and was a huge fan before I joined them later on.
Yeah.
But honestly, they were a great band, and their first album, which I had nothing to do with, is amazing. And so this song's from their second album, which I also had nothing to do with, by the way. But it's a great song, and Mark chose this because he loves it too.
Amazed by science and the wonders of the world, I saw him staring out into the universe. He digs the dinosaurs and fascinating things. It's only people that he has a problem with. And I say, if you wanna sign, if you wanna cry, and will his dreams come true by wishing on a star? Na 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 na. And I say, if you wanna sign, if you wanna live to work or work to live, he dreads to think about our thinking. If you wanna sigh, if you wanna cry, if you wanna sigh, if you wanna cry again.
Well, yeah, so Lucinda was part of, I think, the Radio Blue Mountains connection, and they used to do some cool things up there at the community radio. My office at the moment is actually in that old building, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, she had that punk show, Salubrious Melodies, and the radio station was running band comps at the Gearin or something like that, and so that was pretty cool. And like, she was putting Hassel Brigade on up at the Alex in Lura, and she put out her own compilation CD. So it was cool how, like, the zine then ended up connecting with different people in different forms of media, and they were doing their own things. And then I was like, cool, let's push that through the mag. And they, like, people were just keen. They said, can I write a thing? And I'd say, yeah, like, of course you can. Like, I don't know, like, they probably people could have written anything and I would have published it. But there was all these really cool people that had their own little passions, and Lucinda's thing was the punk, so she's like, I'll start writing for it. Like, it's amazing how profound that era was for all of us. Like, the fact that you've started up this the blog and all that, and bringing back the old music, and that people are so still into it that long later, it's like, it must have been a special time in general. And I think, like, we all documented it in different ways, and it's cool that there's bits and pieces coming up. But I think it was a special time, and that's why it was like, it's worth making a zine, it's worth putting out comp CDs. And, for me, I just started uni, I guess, in 99. And part of my thing was that I was doing media studies. So we were doing video, we were doing, you had to go on a radio station somewhere and do an hour of talking on there. So it was sort of all about, like, putting media out. And so for me, it was like, cool, like, I'll do my own zine about music and see what happens. And it's funny because you start it and you just go, I'll just see what happens. This is a crappy little, I think I said 40 copies of the first one, and then it just starts, like, people go, that's cool, and so you go, I'll do another one, and then it just starts growing and growing. And yeah, it was obviously the perfect time for it, with heaps of bands still around and starting up. And
so this next clip is Mark talking about Ralph music. So when I was interviewing Mark, I just went through all the Obzines because I've got them all digitized, and was looking through at various things. I was just like, yeah, Ralph Music used to write this column in Obzine, but I just didn't know anything about it. So I asked him about it, and this is Mark talking about it.
I do remember going to their place in Blacksland and interviewing them, and yeah, they were interesting cats because they were a bit older, and I think they'd done the pre-music scene, and they were sort of trying to, I don't know, they were trying to sort of be above it all and sort of organise events for the younger people because they'd been there 10 years before or whatever. They put on some, like they booked us for a gig on like the Oberon Oval or something one year, and we drove all the way out there, and then they're like, oh, it's cancelled, but we're going to put a few bands in the pub, and we ended up playing at this pub in Oberon, and then we ended up downstairs in someone's basement in this recording studio because, you know, it was real bizarre. But that, yeah, I think Ralph Music were a bit loose. yeah, like the web stuff was fun. Like, I think because at uni they were teaching us a bit of web stuff, and I just fired up some dodgy, I don't know, it was Angel Fire from memory, and, you know, it's sort of like, oh yeah, throw a messenger board up and everyone's chatting on there, and it was like, it's online, you became part of a different thing where, like, I think you had like Bombshell Zine and some other ones out and about, so people could jump between. Yeah, but it was cool. Like, I don't know, I think I think a little bit of tit for tat and that sort of thing on message boards makes it fun. Like, it's kind of like that was the start of the internet. It was still early, people weren't getting proper bullied like they are now, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, so it was interesting to see Mark mentioning about the right time, and it really was the right time. Especially Penrith being it was a boomer town. Lots of boomers moved out in the late 70s, 80s.
What do you mean was?
But yeah, we were like, you know what I mean? Like, there was a lot of kids around our age at that time, and getting out and about. And so it really was the right...
Yeah.
It did come along right at the exact time.
Yeah. Where are you going, Bundy, in a couple of months from now?
I might be heading somewhere up the mountains.
Yeah. You're leaving Penrith for the first time in your life.
I am.
Yeah, moving up the Blue Mountains. Was this podcast as an excuse for you to write a love letter to the Blue Mountains?
Yeah. Well, I haven't moved there yet, so we'll wait and see after.
Right. So it was the right time. Obzine lasted from 1999 all the way through to, I think, early 2002. And so 2000, 2001 are the key era of when all these bands sort of exploded in the Penrith scene. And like throughout this podcast, you'll have seen just pictures of just bands I've just chucked in there, even though we haven't really spoken about them, just because they're part of that scene. And I just wanted to give everyone a little hello, all the bands that were here in that time and afterwards in the Penrith and Blue Mountain scene that I can think of anyway. And I'm sorry if I missed anybody, but, you know, it's just, I'm just a person.
You know, you're not like a living computer. Or,
no,
you know?
I get pretty close to it sometimes. But you know, it's just a case of I'm pretty stretched thin. So one of the cool things that came out of Obzine is Mark, when it was hitting its stride, he did 2 compilation CDs, and one was called Unearth This, and the other one was called Damaged. And here's Mark talking about these compilation CDs that came out as part of the Obzine sort of experience.
Yeah, so I guess that was the thing. Like, when you're writing about music, you can't hear it. But yeah, it's sort of like one of those things where how do you connect the stuff on the page to actual audio? And like now you'd make a playlist on Spotify or whatever and just, you know, link it, or on Bandcamp. But back then it was like, oh yeah, how do you get it out? And so I was obviously working on my own music and CDs and stuff, and it's sort of like, oh, it's not that hard to put out music on a disc. And like, you know, we're dropping mags at Repressed and Beat Disc and places that sell music anyway. So like it felt real natural to go, well, let's put out an Obzine compilation. And so that was pretty easy. Like I just sort of said to all the bands that we generally communicated with, like, send us a CD, tell us which song you want. And then I just curated, you know, how it might work. And I think I charged everyone because it cost a fortune probably in those days. And then I photographed my friend Adam and turned him into a zombie and put it out. And I had Dave Schletter, who was a mate from Lapston. Like he did he was a programmer, and so he did the thing where you put the disc in, and like each band you could click on them and see all the details. And I thought that was really cool. Like it felt cutting edge back in those days. Yeah, so that was a bit of fun. Like, and then yeah, later on, I guess connecting the skateboarding with the music, with the zine, and doing the Damage one, and getting my mate John to do that incredible artwork on it was really cool. But yeah, I think it's the organisation of this stuff that my brain really likes. Like, you know, you've got to get 20 bands together, figure out all the things, like figure out the artwork, figure out how to get it mastered, like make sure the copyright's sorted, and you know, get them all done, and then somehow distribute them and somehow sell them. Like, it's kind of like the difficulty of something makes it more awesome when you get it done. And I think back then, because it was a bit harder, it was more awesome when you put something out.
I gotta say, like, I loved Obzine and I loved those compilation CDs, but man, the late 90s, early 2000s, I hated CD-ROM components on CDs. Like,
explain why.
Like, you stick them into the computer, and like, you know, some computers could read them, some couldn't, and some reason, like, you stick them into an actual stereo to play the music, and I don't know if it always worked. And I don't know. You buy a CD, I just wanted to listen to the music. I didn't care about there being a CD-ROM on there of some poxy flash animation or I don't know.
I didn't know anything about it.
No, some people would be listening to this going, what is a CD-ROM? You know, like, it's just such a like out of date sort of media.
Like a one of those floppy disk things?
No, it was a CD that you put into a computer.
Oh, okay.
But like, it's I don't know why they called it the CD-ROM, because it's just a CD. I don't know. It's like an ATM machine, maybe. I don't know. But look, we're coming to the end of this podcast now, and I've got a clip of Mark talking about Megadeth, which didn't really fit anywhere else, but I just couldn't leave it out because I just had to ask him. So like, Obzine throughout 2001, like, we see things like the Grounded Festival happening in Penrith, which was a huge sort of event that happened a couple of years. It had migrated out to Penrith from
Parramatta,
and I think even Granville before that.
Okay.
And they did free shows in Penrith, I think, 3 Groundeds or maybe 2 Groundeds, and they had like big bands there, and it was like a great sort of festival at the Museum of Fire in Penrith. And then you know, Mark would interview not just bands that were locally, he was starting to spread out to other bands around Sydney, and like, bands would send stuff in from outside of Penrith Blue Mountains to get reviewed in the zine, because it was everywhere by this point. Like, I think he had it in something like 30 or 40 different locations towards the end. It was huge. Like, I don't know how many copies he was printing. It would have been in the thousands by that point, I'm sure.
Yeah, wow.
And like, the zine looked really good towards the end, and he was doing feature stories on local sort of rehearsal studios in the Blue Mountains. He interviewed Farzan from Symphonic Studios in one of the zines, which was, you know, cool to see. And then you get towards like 2001 at the end, and the zine starts slowing down, only coming out every couple of months. And so in 2002, there's only 2 zines, and the very last zine doesn't even indicate anything about it ending. It just says, oh yeah, a bunch of stuff didn't make it into this zine. We're going to chuck it up on the website. See you next zine, that sort of thing. Then it just didn't happen. We didn't see an issue 27, which would have been the next zine. I've told Mark he should bring out issue 27. You should do it.
Maybe it's like a Chinese democracy
Just,
kind of.
He's
still working on it.
Yeah, just a commemorative issue, you know. I think that would be kind of cool, and I'd be happy to help with it. But yeah, I just think that would be cool. If you think that's a cool idea, you should let us know, and maybe we can convince Mark to do issue 27 of Obzine. It's been a while between drinks. 2002, and then like a 24-year gap, and then 2026 issue 27, and then maybe there'll be another 50-year gap after that.
It could be a Guinness record between issues of
zine. And you know, the first issue was only 40 copies. It doesn't have to be grand. It could just go back to its roots. Yeah. Like, you know, lots of things go back to their roots. Anyway, here's Mark talking about Megadeth, and then we'll hear from him talking about the end of the zine, and just him reflecting on it as well.
My kid keeps asking me if I've got the transcript of that somewhere, or the recording, and I don't know. But I actually remember sitting downstairs at my parents' house in my little faux office, you know, it's a little corner of the house, and just like thinking, oh shoot, I've got to talk to an actual, like, real global musician. Like, how am I going to do this? I'm just a kid, you know. Megadeth were touring, and Dave was actually sitting at Utopia doing the phone calls, doing the media. And he gave me so much time on the phone. Like, I could hear people in the background trying to hurry him up, and he's like, no, I just want to finish these questions. And yeah, I was just so stoked because I grew up on like, some of that heavy stuff from Megadeth. So, and at that point I felt like it was, yeah, pretty amazing. And that's why you do it. Like it takes you on these adventures where you end up doing something which you didn't realize you could do. Because once I got a job, it was pretty hard because I was working in North Sydney. So I was commuting from Blaxland to North Sydney daily, and like I was working on magazines there, like real actual proper magazines all of a sudden. Yeah, and I think it killed my energy and vibe levels, and then it was harder to do gigs and things. And so yeah, I guess that was sort of the slowdown point for me. But I could tell because I was writing in the thing like, oh, we're only going to come out every couple of months, but I'm still doing it, I'm still keen. But obviously life took over a little bit, and yeah, and more than likely I had, like, because I'd have things set up, like it's like, you got a mailing list and you got contributors and stuff, and so there's probably a computer drive somewhere with the next issue like 3/4 finished sort of thing, and I just never got it done, or I just sort of went, this is too hard. Or like Obzine was mostly done on like old computers in the 90s or late 90s, and you sort of go, oh, I think my dad gave me some old floppy disks at some point with some stuff on it, sort of thing. So it's like there's not much digitally except for the old Angel Fire site. Like there's bits and pieces on the Wayback Machine, and it's kind of a shame. Like a lot of stuff, it's kind of like the whole MySpace thing, where it's sort of like if you could go back and easily get the stuff, it'd be great. But it's kind of mostly disappeared. But maybe for the best too. Maybe it's best left in the dirt. I think it was a really good period of time for me in general. Like, I think it was a great period of time for everyone, and I'm really glad that I spent the time to put this stuff together, because I reckon it meant a lot to a lot of people at the time and now, like being able to look back and go, oh, we've got a little bit of banter around it. It's not just like, oh, this was the song. It's like, well, this is sort of what was happening, and this is where it was happening, and that sort of thing. Inspired me to start the Haze magazine years later, and it's like I'm now not publishing anything, and it's like this weird addiction where I kind of want to do something again, but I don't think I ever will. So it's like, oh, I'm glad I've done it. Like I'm glad I've put out so many issues of so many cool magazines. Yeah, and I like the thing I really hope. Like I saw someone at your gig the other night, and he said, oh, I interviewed 5th place, and then I lost the tape or something, and so I wigged out and got anxious about it and just disappeared for 10 years or something like that. And I'm like, what? I said, like, it doesn't matter. Like, this was the cool thing. Like, everyone can have a go at the magazine. Like, I think that was the thing. Like, it helped everyone to have a voice, like, at the time on whatever they were doing. So I think that was the importance of it at the time.
All right, so that's the end of episode 7.
A wrap up.
That's a wrap, and this is going to be our last episode of the podcast for the foreseeable future. I think I personally just find it really hard to slog into them. It's hard finding time to record them.
Yeah.
Bundy's leaving me.
Yeah. I gotta find a house to live in at the moment. Yeah.
Never say never, like Sean Connery and James Bond when he came back in the 80s for that shitty James Bond film, Never Say Never Again. But I'll be still doing zines, and the website's still going, and all the Facebook and Instagram stuff is still going, and the Bandcamp for noise levels as well. But yeah, so just thank you for everyone for listening to these podcasts. The YouTube channel will still be there. I'll still be putting stuff up on it as it comes to me. Yep. Send me your stuff if you got rare stuff that isn't on YouTube anyway. I'd love to put it up for New South Wales bands, or just cool stuff in general that fits our brief. We're going to finish off with a song.
Yep.
The third song that Mark picked, which was Spud Gun. Do you remember Spud Gun, Bundy?
Yep, I sure do.
They were like the Penrith band.
Yeah. They really were. We played a lot of shows with them at the time, and yeah. I remember listening to the couple of old grumpy men going, "These aren't the Clash."
Yeah. So they had a funny, hilarious, like a genuinely funny, intentionally funny stage presence. Because they're just so delightfully half-assed about things sometimes, and I didn't appreciate them as much back then as I do now, thinking back on it. But like Bundy said, we played shows with them. We saw them at heaps of shows. They were in Obzine probably more than any other band. I think there's like 3 interviews with them across the 26 issues of Obzine. And they're just a great sort of machine for self-promotion. Anyway, this song is called Hate. It features on the second of the Obzine compilations, and it's I think the song's held up quite well, and I just want to say thank you again.
No worries.
Thanks, Bundy.
That's a wrap. Okay, thanks, Luke. Until next time. Ciao.